And I'm joined now by the former head of the CIA, John Brennan. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
Can we start, because a lot of people are very interested on what happens next and where things go from here. What is your assessment of how strong support for the regime is inside Iran, and how easy or difficult it might be to shift that?
Well, I think, like all countries, the population is not a monolith. So there's a real split in terms of sentiments toward the government. And yes, there are a lot of individuals who despise the theocracy and are glad that Khamenei died, especially in the cities where you have an educated, professional elite. And sometimes a lot of the Western media are in contact with individuals there. But in a country of over 92 million people, there's a lot of conservative rural areas that are very much supportive of the Islamic revolution and the government. And then all the security and military forces, their families, and those that are actually embedded as part of the regime. So, if anything, I think the support for the regime may have increased as a result of the aggression that has been carried out by U.S. and Israeli military forces. And there's usually a rallying around the flag, so to speak, when something like that happens. So I do think it's quite uncertain in terms of what's going to happen in the future, but there is a reservoir of support within Iran that I think the remaining leaders, the IRGC and others, are relying on.
And from what you hear from the American administration, do you think that was and is fully understood? Because it seems to me that the tone coming from Donald Trump and others around him has shifted over the last couple of days, from asking Iranians to rise up, essentially to help him change the regime, to talking about different war aims.
Well, I think they've come to realize pretty quickly that this is much more complicated than I think some people thought. I think Donald Trump was led into this war by Bibi Netanyahu, who's been wanting to carry out these types of attacks against Iran for many, many years. And I think Trump was lulled into feeling that just as the successful operation in Venezuela demonstrated, the U.S. military can do some wonderful things. But again, against a sovereign state and engaging in sort of war activities is much more complicated. So I think he is being a little bit now chastened by the early response of the Iranians, which has taken a toll. And so there's not only shifting rationale for this needless, in my view, war, but also shifting emphasis on different types of objectives. And quite frankly, I don't think there's really been much strategic thought that has been put into this military operation, aside from just wanting to rain down on the Iranian military, security services, and leadership, the brute force of American military power. But that's the easy part. Complicated part is what happens next.
And you know the intelligence community obviously incredibly well. Do you think that those warnings would have been issued to the president before he embarked on this campaign?
I'd like to think so, but the leadership of the intelligence community these days is rather partisan and very supportive of Donald Trump. And I don't know how much of the professional intelligence officers have been able to actually sit down and tell them what they think is the situation inside Iran and how resilient and defiant the Iranian regime will be. Again, I don't think there was a lot of consideration in advance of this operation. I do think the fact that U.S. and Israeli intelligence were able to pinpoint the exact location and timing of this leadership meeting, which resulted in the death of Khamenei, probably triggered the timing of this operation.
Yeah.
Again, I think not much thought has been given into what is going to now be in front of us.
And we are now seeing the conflict spread out to the wider region. What do you think is likely to happen in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, now we see that I guess there were some drones that hit the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, which is a fair distance from the Iranian mainland. And I think the Iranians believe that they're really in an existential fight for their survival of the regime. And just the way they carried out missile strikes against Gulf Arab states. I think they're trying to broaden this war to make it much more impactful, and it's going to damage different types of infrastructure. Whether you're hitting hotels or embassies or whatever else, I think they're trying to increase pressure on the United States to desist from the continuation of these military operations. So I expect Iran to resort to whatever means it has. It's probably depleting its missile inventory pretty quickly, but it has cyber capabilities, it has terrorist capabilities, it has standoff capabilities that it can exercise in different locations. So I don't know how much of a network they have of operatives, but I wouldn't be surprised to be seeing more of these types of attacks further away from the Gulf.
And would you be worried if you were still doing the job that you had done in the past? Would you be worried about increased risk of terror attacks on American soil?
Yes, it seems as though the recent attack in Austin, Texas, may have had, in fact, an Iranian dimension to it in terms of an individual who's upset at what is happening. And there are a lot of people who are dying now inside of Iran and even outside, especially inside of Iran. And I think this is just going to perpetuate the cycle of violence and retribution. For many years, the Iranians have looked upon the United States as being the aggressor and Israel as being the aggressor in terms of carrying out assassinations, invading Iraq, doing a lot of things that they thought were directed against them. So again, I think they feel as though they need to respond and lash back, and they'll use whatever means necessary. They don't have the military might of the United States or Israel, but I think they will resort to whatever capabilities they still have.
Yeah, and that may look more like terror attacks. Can I ask you, the spectre of the war in Iraq is hanging over the conversation we are having here in the UK, especially when it comes to what the Prime Minister is willing to do in committing British assets to what's happening now in Iran. Is there the same feeling in America? Do the public feel that fear of engaging in a forever war? I know it did actually form part of President Trump's campaign. He promised not to do that. Do you have the same feeling in America about this?
I think there is an increasing sentiment here in the United States that what we're doing right now against Iran is reminiscent of what happened in Iraq. And the repercussions of that fateful U.S. Operation to invade Iraq in 2003, basically it then led to tremendous violence and bloodshed and chaos inside Iraq. Beyond its borders. It gave birth to ISIS and a lot of terrorism and bloodletting. And just after, almost 20 years, we've gotten beyond that. But to me, what's happening now is the second biggest, or the second U.S. Mistake of tragic proportions in terms of impacting the region. And again, I think what we're doing now is just going to increase this cycle of violence and retribution. And it's not trying to address some of these underlying issues by non-military means. And again, I think, Israel was pushing hard on this, Netanyahu was pushing hard on it. And unfortunately, Trump, who doesn't really have a good sense of the history of the experiences that we've had before, I think he felt almost intoxicated with, power and U.S. military power, and felt as though he could do this and basically clean up the Middle East. It's not like that. This is going to be an issue and a problem, I think, for a long time to come.
Can I ask you finally, that the president has had some pretty strong words for the UK Prime Minister. I mentioned Keir Starmer was hesitant when it came to supporting the initial attack on Iran. Is there a concern for the special relationship? Is it still special? Can it withstand this tension between the two men?
Well, I think Donald Trump has a much different view about special relationships, a different view about NATO. And so, I think Prime Minister Starmer was wise not to participate in these strikes. In 2003, the United States at least went to the Security Council. It went to the U.S. Congress. This seems to have been put together, pretty quickly. and without the prior needed consultation, as well as very little rationale, if no rationale, for the invasion or the attack. I didn't see any imminent threat at all, and I think this administration now is grasping at straws to try to explain the rationale. So, unfortunately, I think U.S. foreign policy is in an era now far, far different than previous administrations, both Republican and Democratic. I'd like to think that the U.S.-British relationship is strong enough to withstand the current problems, but I do think that the United Kingdom needs to follow a foreign policy that is pragmatic, is rational, cannot ignore what's happening here in the United States, certainly, but they cannot just go along with what they might see as ill-advised policies and actions just because Donald Trump wants them to do it.
John Brennan, thank you so much for giving us your expertise this morning. I really appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks, Kate.